Great. All right. So again, yeah, I'm Marc Wegerif. Thanks for this opportunity to share with you on the informal food economy and COVID-19. Really, I'm just setting the scene, drawing from a position paper that was developed for the COVID-19 People's Coalition on Informal Food Trade. So that had inputs from a number of people, some of them who are on the line, including informal food traders and people in the informal economy themselves. So I hope they will be able to bring their real experiences to this later. I'm just trying to set the scene here. I'm going to talk about the scale and the nature of this sector or food economy, then the impact of COVID-19 and the responses to it, and then talk about some of what is being suggested as immediate actions that are needed, as well as longer term actions. So I'm going to try to keep it lively, but not speak too fast. I hope, Florian, you'll indicate in some way if I'm inaudible or something like that. Otherwise, I assume you can all hear me.
Yes.
So first of all, the informal food economy, we're talking really about spaza shops, bucky traders, street traders, and hawkers. It's valued at somewhere around 360 billion Rand a year, making up about 30 to 50% of the food and grocery sector. They're quite different estimates from different players, but it's at least somewhere in that range of value and proportion of the food sector. So this is a substantial part of food supplies in the country and food distribution. It also employs far more people than the formal food trade. There's estimated to be somewhere around 3 million people in the informal economy. And it contributes in many ways to social integration, including of non-citizens into the local economy. These are owner-operated enterprises that are embedded within their communities, unlike, say, corporations whose owners might sit far away, even in other countries. It contributes a lot to food security in a number of ways. Studies have found that about 70% of people in poorer neighborhoods, basically in our townships and informal settlements, are buying from informal food traders. It doesn't mean only from those food traders, but they're buying from them on a regular basis. It makes up a core part of their access to food. They're doing so because these informal food traders are making food more accessible by being close to where people live, or in other cases, close to where people work, or selling at transport nodes where people are traveling anyway. They also work long hours, so they're available when people have the time and money to buy. They sell in flexible, including in small quantities that people can afford that meet their needs at that time. In some cases, especially from what I found in fresh produce, they're selling considerably cheaper than the formal sector. So from my own research, mostly around Johannesburg, we found fresh produce selling at half and a third of the price in the street than it is sold in the supermarket. That's a substantial saving for people who are buying there. And in many cases, when traders know people, they also give interest-free credit and so on, which helps people tide over those times when it's difficult to get access to money and food. They're also a very key component of a wider agri-food system. In Johannesburg, they're estimated to be buying at least 50% of all the produce coming through the Johannesburg City Deep Fresh Produce Market. So they're a very important outlet for farmers as well. And I would argue important, especially for smaller black farmers, and the potential is there for them to be linking up, which is already happening, but to be done more. So the impact of COVID-19 and the responses to it, of course, the lockdown being the biggest response to it. And I have to say, I'm not arguing against the lockdown, but we have to be aware of the impact and we have to try and make it work in a way that doesn't cause more harm, especially to more vulnerable people. So the first impact has just been a loss of income to all the informal traders. So 3 million people at least suddenly had no income. And these are not people who have big reserves and so on. So this has had a big knock-on impact to many others, the landlords where spaza shops are, the farmers who are supplying, the transporters and so on. It's resulting in higher costs of food to eaters, both because they're now having to buy in some cases in more expensive outlets, and also often now having to travel by taxi or other public transport and thus spending in order to get to the places that are open. This is leading to reduced consumption of fresh produce. It's almost certainly negatively impacting on food and nutrition security. Of course, we don't have surveys yet to confirm this, but anecdotally, we can see that people are eating less fresh food, less fresh produce and so on. People having to travel further to get food is not only an increased cost, but it's also a greater risk because they're sharing public transport and often now having to go to places that are crowded. I talked to someone in Sebokeng, for example, the other day, And they said there's basically, even after the amendments to the regulations, just last week, no informal traders are working in Sebo King, and they estimated that 80% of the spaza shops are not functioning. So now more people are having to travel to the only two places serving open, basically the supermarkets, in a township of 250,000 people. And they have to do it in the morning because of the public transport restriction. So going to those places is so crowded, you can't observe social distancing, etc. Many spaza shops were stopped from operating, despite the fact that they should have, in terms of the regulations, been allowed to operate. We saw problematic statements from the minister that created the impression it would only be South Africans willing to operate. We have stories from around the country of poorly informed and or corrupt police and security forces shutting down shops even when they had permits to operate, in some cases demanding bribes and so on. So the poor communication has caused confusion and a sort of opportunity for opportunists to step in and harass traders and spaza shop owners. The informal traders were of course completely stopped from operating. Then we had the amendment to the regulations which enabled some to operate, but the experiences have been very varied, and I just want to touch on that a bit, because I think this was an important sort of victory in a sense that the government, having disregarded the role of informal food traders, now allows them to operate, recognize them at a national level at least, but implementation was difficult. A lot of the information was not clear, and we saw differences across provinces, differences in different municipalities. So we had some municipalities who were proactive and had existing permitting systems and could roll that out. Others who haven't been issuing permits before, so suddenly faced with having to issue permits for them, and some putting in place what seemed to be highly unreasonable demands, especially under the circumstances, for people to get these permits. So I've talked to traders who've gone back to work and are doing reasonable business, others who decided for their own reasons and their own safety to stay at home, and others who were refused permits, even though they've been trading for 10, 20 years in those areas. So we have a very mixed experience and ongoing challenges. And then other traders who reported that despite having permits, they still got harassed by the police. I talked to someone who only last week had been trading for a week and a half with a new permit, then had all their stock taken because the Johannesburg Metro Police said that their permit was now out of date a week and a half after they got it, and wouldn't allow them to go and renew it before taking all their stock and so on. So very mixed experience. So coming to what we need to see happening, and this, as I said again, it comes out of a position developed for the People's Coalition. So many people contributed. It's not my brilliant ideas, if I have any. So first of all, we need to remove these complex requirements for new registration. I think many traders accept the need for registration of some form, but sorry, I saw something popping up on my screen there. But what is a serious problem is when there's all sorts of new requirements, new documents needed and so on, that is making it impossible, even for people who've traded for decades in some cases, to get these permits and carry on. We need state support for the safe operation. No one is arguing for any reckless approach to COVID-19. It's serious. But state support should also be there, especially at a municipal level, to facilitate social distancing, to provide hygiene products, to provide water and sanitation, and importantly, to provide security as well, especially in these times when some people are in desperate situations, etc. I think it's worth noting that WeGo did a guide for informal traders, and I think that we should circulate widely. And it shows that these basic measures can be done. They're not very different from what's being put in place at supermarkets, and I would argue it's entirely feasible to do this for informal traders and spaza shops. We need clear and consistent messaging from leaders. We've seen the confusion that is caused when leaders speak out of line or make unfortunate statements. The trading permits need to be valid for a reasonable length of time. There's been a particular problem for asylum seekers and so on who get issued short-term asylum permits which are linked, and then their trade permits get linked to that. So they're having to go back and renew every 3 months in some cases. I won't even go into the problems at Home Affairs, but now on top of that is the problems of linking those immigration permits to trade permits. So give people a reasonable length of time, give certainty. It also reduces the administration burden on the authorities. We need emergency relief to all informal traders, food and non-food. Even those who are selling food, some have not been able to go back. Some are working, but they're not getting the same income they used to get because of the economic impact and so on. And we mustn't forget the non-food informal traders who are also completely out of an income. And what we don't want is any division of informal traders. They need to be able to stand together and they need to be supported together. We really need to be putting in place and seeing the state putting in place restart packages to assist traders to get back to work after lockdown. Many have lost all their stock. They've lost their capital. They're eating their capital now, sitting at home. So they need to be able to restart. This is not just charity. It is kickstarting the economy. And we're hearing about so much money that is being put aside to kickstart the economy. This is a key part of the economy that should be kickstarted quicker than any others, because it will have more positive impact on poverty, on food security, and so on. And all of this needs to be done working with the trader associations who know their members and know their needs. And this is the last slide. It's worth, in this time of crisis, looking to the longer term, looking at what needs to be put in place and being cautious about some of the problematic measures that could be put in place at this time. We would argue for town planning and regulations to be amended to secure space for informal traders. And this needs to be done in a way that fits their mode of operating, not put people far away in some kind of isolated spot or whatever. You know, it has to understand that accessibility, etc., is part of what makes informal trade work. So we need the regulations and the town planning to make that space available. Ideally, we should have every citizen able to walk to a place where they can buy food and fresh produce. And that can be built into planning. We need improved infrastructure for traders, especially water, sanitation, shelter, and storage. And this is worth investing in if we understand how important this sector is for food security and for employment. We can look at facilitating new links with a diversity of suppliers, especially farmers, especially small farmers, and build those links to the benefit of traders, eaters of food, and the farmers. This is this point was not in the position, but I'm going to raise it because I think it's important, that we could be putting in place a social safety net for informal traders, similar, for example, to the unemployment insurance fund that is there for formal workers. I believe that many traders who are saving and so on would be happy to contribute something to this as well, if they knew it was going to be well run. And so we've seen the vulnerability through this of informal traders. We need to put in place safety nets that would protect and look after them in these kind of crises. And the last point, which is a sort of overall point, we need to recognize value and then enable this economic activity, the foods and this sector. And we need to do so because it contributes to food security, it contributes to local economic development, it contributes socially. This is all valuable, it needs to be recognized. And I would argue that a lot of the problems we've seen is because our leaders, from the most senior political leaders down to the local policemen, don't know enough about the sector, they don't understand its contribution, and they don't value it. And that's why when they first made their emergency regulations, they completely disregarded this sector. And that's why policemen think nothing of confiscating the stock of a trader in the street, whereas they would never be doing that to a ShopRite or a Pick n Pay. Sorry, I ran a few minutes over time. Thank you very much.